Episode 4: The Silent Frontier. Part 1: A War We Were Never Meant to Find. Narrated by Commander Amelia Carter. There is an old saying among explorers: you never arrive exactly where you expect. Sometimes your destination changes. Sometimes you change. And occasionally, you discover that the universe has been waiting with a question you never thought to ask. By the time this happened, the Horizon had been away from Bastion 9 for almost a year. A year of forgotten observatories, ancient Guardian archives, silent worlds whose inhabitants had vanished 40,000 years before our own civilizations first reached the stars. We had learned many things. The Guardians had not simply fled. They had studied, observed, recorded. Every discovery made them seem less like mythical beings and more like scientists on an unimaginably large scale. Each station we visited raised new questions instead of providing final answers. And somehow that made us admire them even more. Our next destination was another faint marker recovered from a Guardian archive months earlier. Not a distress signal. Not a beacon, simply another coordinate. Another breadcrumb left by a civilization that seemed determined to teach rather than explain. No one aboard expected what waited for us there. Space is vast beyond imagination. Even with faster-than-light travel, emerging inside a populated star system is exceptionally rare. The calculations are precise. The margins enormous. The odds of arriving in the middle of an active battle are almost non-existent. Yet improbability has never concerned the universe. The stars have little interest in statistics. Horizon exiting FTL in 5 seconds. The familiar announcement echoed across the bridge. Outside the forward view screen, the tunnel of distorted light slowly unraveled into ordinary space. Stars reappeared. The system's yellow-white primary filled the distant darkness. Then contacts. Lieutenant Arlent's voice cut through the bridge. Multiple objects. Another officer spoke almost simultaneously. High-velocity projectiles detected. Before anyone had time to ask a question, the first explosions flashed against our shields. The bridge shook not violently, but enough to remind us that something had struck the ship. Warning indicators briefly illuminated across the tactical display. Automatic defense systems activated without waiting for orders. Our shields absorbed the impacts effortlessly. Report. I was already standing. 12 No. 16 vessels surrounding our emergence point. Another impact. Then another. Missiles, railgun rounds, low-energy beam weapons. Every one of them directed toward us. They're firing from multiple vectors. Marcus Donnelly leaned over the engineering display. Our shields are barely noticing. I almost smiled. That was the most Marcus way possible to describe incoming fire. The tactical display rapidly organized the contacts. Immediately, something looked strange. The ships were crude, functional, industrial, nothing like the elegant vessels of the Union. Large external radiators, exposed propulsion assemblies, visible armor plates bolted onto the hulls. No deflector signatures, no gravitational maneuvering. Their engines relied entirely on conventional reaction drives. Most surprising of all, they weren't attacking together. Half the vessels were firing at the other half. We had simply appeared between them. They're fighting each other, Lyra observed. Looks that way, I answered. Daniel frowned. So they think we're reinforcements. For both sides, Marcus added dryly. The tactical display confirmed his suspicion. Weapons from every direction continued converging on our position. Each side apparently believed the other had unveiled some impossible new weapon. Neither side hesitated. Fear had overridden caution. Damage. Marcus didn't even look up. Commander. He hesitated just long enough to sound almost apologetic. They haven't caused any. Our shields had dispersed every projectile before it reached the hull. The beam weapons barely registered above background noise. Several missiles had detonated harmlessly hundreds of meters away after confusing our defensive field. To the crews outside, the Horizon must have looked invulnerable. I wasn't sure that was a good thing. Recommendations. Lyra answered first. We're interfering with the battle simply by existing. Kale nodded. The longer we remain here, the more likely both sides are to redirect additional forces toward us. Daniel folded his arms. If they're already at war, the last thing they need is an unexplained miracle. I agreed. Helm, Commander, take us away from the engagement. No return fire. I looked at the tactical display one last time. 16 ships. Hundreds of lives. A war whose causes we did not understand. No, the answer came easily. We're explorers. The Horizon accelerated smoothly. Not quickly by our standards, but to the combatants surrounding us our movement must have appeared almost supernatural. Within seconds we had crossed thousands of kilometers. Weapons fire gradually ceased. The battle behind us resumed. Neither fleet attempted pursuit. Their ships simply weren't capable. Soon only distant flashes marked the conflict. Then even those disappeared behind the curve of the planet. Silence returned to space. No one spoke for several moments. The bridge suddenly felt much larger. Almost peaceful, as if the battle had belonged to another universe. I remained standing, looking at the tactical display. 1 year into our mission, we had expected abandoned Guardian ruins. Ancient mysteries. Perhaps another forgotten archive. Instead, we had found a civilization at war. One that had no idea it was not alone in the galaxy. And somehow, I couldn't shake the feeling that arriving in the middle of their conflict was only the beginning of the story. Part 2, Two Worlds, One Past. When the excitement of an unexpected encounter fades, routine takes over. It always does. Every sensor begins collecting data. Every department starts asking questions. And eventually, those questions become more important than the surprise itself. That was one of the first lessons I learned as a commander. Never let the extraordinary distract you from understanding the ordinary. Because the ordinary is usually where the answers are hiding. The Horizon settled into a distant orbit around the system's outer gas giant, well beyond the range of the battle we had interrupted. From there, our long-range sensors could observe the entire system without drawing unnecessary attention. The bridge lights dimmed slightly as scientific operations took priority over tactical displays. This was our natural state. Not combat readiness. Curiosity. Initial survey completed, Lyra announced. A three-dimensional model of the system appeared above the central holographic table. It consists of 6 planets, an extensive asteroid belt between the 3rd and 4th orbits, and numerous dwarf bodies in the outer system. She highlighted 2 blue-green worlds. These are the inhabited planets. One orbited comfortably within the star's habitable zone. The other lay slightly farther out but possessed a denser atmosphere, creating a similar average surface temperature. Both worlds shimmered with clouds and oceans. Both carried the unmistakable signatures of technological civilizations. Cities, power grids, orbital infrastructure, thousands of artificial satellites, shipyards, mining stations. Everything one would expect from a civilization that had only recently begun reaching beyond its own planet. Population estimates. Daniel glanced toward Lyra. Approximately 8 billion on the inner planet. She shifted her attention to the second world. 6 billion on the outer colony. Marcus raised an eyebrow. Colony. Lyra nodded. It wasn't always independent. Kale stepped closer to the display. The orbital architecture is remarkably similar. He pointed toward several stations. The engineering principles are identical. Marcus studied the images for only a few seconds before agreeing. Same construction methods. The same alloys, Lyra added. The same reactor designs. The same communication standards. Kale looked at me. They were once a single civilization. That conclusion spread through the bridge almost immediately. Not because anyone had guessed. Because the evidence was overwhelming. 2 planets. 1 technological heritage. 1 language family. 1 industrial tradition. 1 history. Somewhere along the way, they had become 2 nations. And now they were fighting one another. Lieutenant Arlen expanded the tactical display. We've identified 2 independent military command networks. Each planet maintained its own orbital fleet, its own defensive stations, its own surveillance systems, its own military infrastructure. The battle we had interrupted was not unusual. Archived sensor recordings revealed dozens of similar engagements over the previous months. Convoys intercepted, mining platforms attacked, reconnaissance patrols destroyed. It wasn't a sudden crisis. It was routine, a war that had become part of everyday life. Can we estimate how long the conflict has lasted? I asked. Lyra answered before Lyra could. Our passive observations suggest several decades. She adjusted another layer of data. The oldest orbital debris fields are heavily weathered by micrometeorite impacts. Kale nodded thoughtfully. Long enough for an entire generation to grow up knowing nothing else. Daniel sighed quietly. There are children down there who have never seen peace. No one replied. Some statements don't require discussion. The cultural analysis began almost immediately. Language algorithms compared thousands of intercepted civilian broadcasts, news transmissions, commercial communications, educational programming, entertainment, even weather reports. The similarities were striking. The accents differed. Certain expressions had evolved independently. Political terminology had changed, but the languages remained almost entirely compatible. Marcus chuckled. So they're arguing in different dialects. Daniel smiled. History has seen stranger things. Several hours later, Lyra completed the first draft of our historical reconstruction. It appears their civilization achieved fusion power approximately 2 centuries ago. She advanced the timeline. Interplanetary travel followed within a few decades. The second habitable world had been celebrated as the greatest discovery in their history. Massive expeditions, scientific cooperation, shared investment, entire cities transported across interplanetary space. Hope, optimism, a new beginning. Then the disagreements began. Who governed the new world? Who owned its mineral wealth? Should the colony remain politically dependent or become autonomous? Negotiations failed. Economic sanctions followed. Military incidents. Then the first orbital battle. No one alive seemed to remember exactly who had fired the first shot. Only that every retaliation had justified the next one. It always begins with certainty, Kale said quietly. Everyone looked toward him. He continued without lifting his eyes from the display. Each side believes history belongs exclusively to them. He paused. Eventually, history belongs to the war. No one disagreed. The bridge became silent again. Outside, the two inhabited planets continued their endless dance around the same star. From orbit, no border could be seen. No front lines. No political divisions. Just two beautiful worlds suspended in darkness. The universe itself recognized no difference between them. Only the people living there did. Commander, Lieutenant Arlen interrupted the silence. We've received something. A transmission. He shook his head. No. He enlarged a sensor display. Two transmissions. One originated from the inner planet. The other from the outer world. Both had been transmitted at nearly the same moment. Neither was encrypted. Neither contained hostile code. Neither appeared intended for the other side. Instead, both were directed toward us. They're hailing us, Daniel said. I looked around the bridge. After hours of observation, speculation, and analysis, the moment we had anticipated had finally arrived. Two governments. Two rival civilizations. Each convinced they had been the first to speak with visitors from another world. And each undoubtedly hoping we would choose their side. Part 3: Voices Across the Divide. There is no handbook for first contact. Every civilization imagines the moment differently. Some expect celebration. Others prepare for invasion. Most assume they will recognize the unknown when it finally arrives. Reality is rarely so accommodating. When two worlds have spent generations preparing for war, the arrival of strangers is simply interpreted as another battlefield. The two transmissions continued repeating at regular intervals. Neither government appeared aware that the other had also contacted us. That alone told us something. Despite decades of conflict, they still lacked the ability to monitor every corner of their own system. Lyris translation algorithms had already made remarkable progress. The mathematical structures were familiar. Their radio technology resembled what humanity had used centuries before. Within another hour, we could understand enough to begin a conversation. Commander, Daniel said, if we answer one first, the other assumes we've chosen a side, I finished. He nodded. Exactly. Marcus leaned back in his chair. So we don't answer either. Kale slowly shook his head. Silence is also a message. Everyone looked toward him. If they receive no reply, each government may conclude the other established secret communications. I sighed. So every option makes someone suspicious. Kale offered the slightest smile. Welcome to diplomacy. A few quiet laughs broke the tension. After several minutes of discussion, we reached what seemed the only reasonable solution. We would answer both governments. At exactly the same moment. With exactly the same message. Every word identical. Every transmission synchronized to the millisecond. No room for misunderstanding. At least that was the hope. I stepped into the communications room. Unlike the bridge, it was quiet. Only the gentle hum of processors and the soft glow of holographic displays accompanied us. Lieutenant Elian looked up from the translation console. The linguistic confidence level is approximately 94%. Enough. He smiled. If they're patient. Let's hope they are. The recording was intentionally simple. No grand speeches. No declarations. Just the truth. To the governments of both inhabited worlds. My name is Commander Amelia Carter. I represent the exploration vessel Horizon. We are not affiliated with either of your governments. We are explorers from another civilization. We entered your system unintentionally during your recent engagement. We regret interrupting your operations. We seek neither territory nor resources. Our mission is scientific exploration. If you are willing, we would welcome peaceful dialogue with representatives from both of your worlds. This invitation is extended equally to each government. We will remain in a neutral orbit while awaiting your response. No threats, no demonstrations of power, no promises, just honesty. Sometimes that is the most difficult language to speak. Transmit. 2 identical signals departed the horizon. One toward the inner planet, the other toward the outer world. Their travel times differed by less than 3 seconds. Now we waited. Waiting has always been one of exploration's least appreciated skills. Hours passed. Scientific teams continued mapping the system. Marcus inspected recordings of the primitive weapons that had struck our shields. Daniel reviewed atmospheric analyses for both planets. Kale and Selira immersed themselves in intercepted historical broadcasts, fascinated by how 2 societies with identical origins had slowly drifted apart. Lyra studied the star. She had barely spoken since our arrival, which usually meant she had noticed something no one else had. I found her alone in astrophysics. The primary star rotated slowly above the central holographic projector. Hundreds of spectral lines floated around it. She didn't immediately notice I had entered. Something bothering you. She looked up. Not bothering. She hesitated. Confusing. She expanded the stellar analysis. I've checked the calibration 6 times. No instrument errors. None. What did you find? She zoomed in on an almost invisible band within the star's electromagnetic spectrum. This shouldn't exist. I looked at the display. To me, it looked like little more than another graph. To Lyra, it was apparently extraordinary. The star produces a continuous low-intensity background emission. She highlighted the pattern. It isn't strong. It isn't dangerous. It has almost no measurable effect on ordinary matter. I folded my arms. So why is it important? Instead of answering, she opened another file. One I recognized immediately. Guardian research. Specifically, our own studies of the cognitive camouflage phenomenon. The 2 graphs appeared side by side. They were not identical. Not even close. But there was a resemblance. A subtle one. The overall frequencies differed. The intensity was dramatically lower. Yet certain harmonic structures repeated with almost uncanny precision. I looked at Lyra. You think they're related? I don't know. She was careful as always. But I don't believe in coincidences. An alert interrupted us. Bridge priority. Incoming communications. Both governments had answered. Again at exactly the same moment. Back on the bridge, 2 windows appeared on the main display. Each contained representatives from one of the rival worlds. For the first time in their history, they were not looking only at us. They were also looking at each other. Neither delegation had expected that. The surprise on their faces was unmistakable. For a long moment, no one spoke. 2 civilizations. One shared history. A war spanning decades. And between them, a single exploration ship that had crossed distances neither side could yet imagine. I had the distinct feeling that our real mission in this system was only beginning. Part 4 echoes between the stars. The first conversation between civilizations is often imagined as a moment of celebration. History teaches otherwise. The first words exchanged between strangers are rarely about friendship. They are about uncertainty. Who are you? Why are you here? Can you be trusted? Those questions are universal. Whether spoken by humans or by civilizations separated by thousands of light years. The communications chamber had been configured for simultaneous contact. 2 holographic windows floated before us. On the left stood the delegation from the inner planet. On the right, representatives of the outer world. The moment they realized they could see one another, their expressions changed. Neither delegation had expected the horizon to connect both governments. For the first time in years, their leaders faced each other without missiles or warships between them. Only silence. I broke it gently. My name is Commander Amelia Carter. I welcome both governments equally. We have not come to judge your conflict. We have come to understand it. Neither delegation answered immediately. Instead, they studied us. Studied our uniforms. Our faces. The different species standing together on the bridge. Humans. Valerie. Illyrians. Civilizations that had once been strangers themselves. I wondered what they saw. An alliance. A mystery. Or simply their own future. Finally, one of the delegates from the inner planet spoke. He appeared elderly by the standards of his species. Gray markings covered the sides of his face. His uniform carried numerous military insignias. You claim to come from another civilization. Can you prove it? A reasonable question. I nodded toward the main view screen. Lieutenant. The external cameras activated. The image shifted. The horizon appeared suspended against the stars, far beyond the scale of anything orbiting either planet. Its graceful hull reflected the distant sunlight. Not a warship, not a cargo vessel, not anything they had ever built. One of the delegates from the outer world whispered something to a colleague. Although the translator rendered the words only approximately, the meaning was unmistakable. It cannot be ours. Marcus leaned toward me. I think they're finally believing us. I hope so. I'm not entirely convinced. He smiled. Neither am I. The conversation continued cautiously. The government asked dozens of questions. Where had we come from? How many inhabited worlds existed beyond their system? How had we crossed interstellar space? How had our vessels survived the battle unharmed? Some questions we answered honestly. Others we politely declined. There was no benefit in overwhelming a civilization that had only recently mastered interplanetary flight. Knowledge has its own pace. Eventually, I asked the question that mattered. Why are your worlds at war? Silence returned. This time it lasted much longer. The representative from the inner planet answered first. The colony declared independence. They seized shared industrial assets. They refused existing constitutional agreements. The delegate from the outer world interrupted immediately. We exercised our right to self-government. You attempted economic control. You treated our world as a distant province. Another interruption. Another accusation. Soon both delegations were speaking at once. Years of frustration poured into a conversation that had barely begun. I raised a hand. Neither side noticed. Daniel quietly muted their audio. The bridge became peaceful again. Marcus looked relieved. I already like this feature. A few restrained smiles appeared around the room. When the discussion resumed, we spoke to each delegation separately. Not because we wished to divide them, but because neither could truly listen while defending itself. Over the next several hours, a clearer picture emerged. Neither government had begun the war believing it would last. Each expected a quick victory. Each believed the other would eventually compromise. Instead, every loss demanded retaliation. Every retaliation justified another offensive. Children became soldiers. Scientists became weapons engineers. Factories became military industries. Eventually, the war itself became the economy. Peace no longer frightened the politicians. It frightened everyone whose livelihood depended upon continuing the conflict. Daniel summarized it quietly. They've forgotten what normal looks like. No one challenged his observation. Late that evening, as the diplomatic discussions paused, Lyra entered the bridge carrying a tablet. Her expression immediately caught my attention. She had found something. I've completed the stellar analysis. She projected several new maps. The anomalous radiation is stronger than we first believed. Kale looked intrigued. Localized. She nodded. Very. The radiation wasn't spreading uniformly throughout the system. It fluctuated, almost rhythmically, following invisible structures surrounding the star. Marcus frowned. Natural. I think so. You think? She smiled. I've stopped making absolute statements around this crew. Selira enlarged another layer of the survey. This is interesting. A faint cloud of highlighted points appeared beyond the fourth planet. The asteroid belt. Millions of rocky bodies. Ice fragments. Metallic asteroids. Nothing unusual. At first glance. Then the computer isolated one region. There, hidden among thousands of drifting objects, was something artificial. Extremely small. Its energy signature was effectively zero. No active reactor. No transmissions. No beacon. Nothing that should have attracted our attention. Except every few minutes, a microscopic electrical pulse escaped its deteriorated systems. Not a distress call. Not a transmission. Almost a heartbeat. Kale stepped closer to the display. His voice became almost reverent. No. Selira looked at him. You recognize the architecture. He nodded slowly. The geometry. The proportions. The material reflections. He looked at me. I would be very surprised if that isn't a Guardian station. Marcus crossed his arms. That's tiny. Exactly, Kale replied. It wasn't built to impress anyone. It was built to work. The bridge grew quiet. Outside, the two rival civilizations continued watching one another across millions of kilometers. Their diplomats expected another conversation the following day. Meanwhile, a forgotten scientific outpost, abandoned for 40,000 years, waited silently inside an unexplored region of the asteroid belt. We had arrived in this system because of an accident. We had remained because of a war. But now, for the first time since our arrival, it felt as though the Guardians themselves were quietly pointing us toward the reason they had once come here. And I had learned, over the past year, never to ignore one of their breadcrumbs. Part 5: The Observatory and the Asteroids. Every explorer eventually learns an uncomfortable truth. The greatest discoveries are rarely the ones we are searching for. They are the ones quietly waiting just outside our expectations. When we entered this system, we believed we had interrupted someone else's war. Now, the war had become only one chapter of a much older story. The following morning, both planetary governments accepted our proposal. Not a peace conference. Not negotiations. Only a neutral communication channel. Representatives from both worlds would be permitted to exchange messages aboard the Horizon, with our crew acting solely as facilitators. No military discussions. No intelligence sharing. No strategic advantage. Simply a place where conversation was still possible. It was a small step. But history often begins with small steps. With the diplomatic situation temporarily stable, I authorized an expedition to investigate the mysterious structure inside the asteroid belt. Kale insisted on joining. Naturally, Selira volunteered before anyone asked. Marcus claimed that if the station was 40,000 years old, someone would inevitably need to repair something. Lyra merely looked at the sensor readings one last time. I've waited all night to see this place. Daniel smiled. I noticed. A shuttle departed the Horizon a short time later. The asteroid belt stretched before us like an ancient graveyard. Millions of rocks drifted through silent darkness. Some were little more than frozen fragments. Others measured dozens of kilometers across. Between them, almost invisible against the surrounding stone, waited the station. It was remarkably easy to overlook. Even knowing exactly where to search, our sensors lost it several times. No camouflage field. No active concealment. Simply an object so small and so weathered that space itself had nearly reclaimed it. As we approached, its purpose became immediately apparent. It was never intended to impress visitors. Unlike the enormous Guardian installations we had explored during the past year, this structure resembled a modest scientific laboratory. A central cylindrical habitat. Several sensor arrays extending outward. A compact observatory dome. External docking clamps barely large enough for maintenance craft. Marcus looked almost disappointed. I've seen larger mining stations. Kale smiled. And yet this may prove more valuable than all of them. Docking procedures required almost no effort. The station had long ago lost all power. No active systems remained. No security. No automated defenses. Only silence. The airlocks opened manually after Marcus bypassed mechanisms that had remained untouched for 40 millennia. The interior was exactly as we expected. Dark, cold, perfectly preserved. Our helmet lights slowly illuminated the first corridor. Dust floated weightlessly in the still air. The walls bore the familiar geometric designs of Guardian engineering. Functional, elegant, unadorned. Nothing had been built for decoration. Everything existed for a reason. Kale ran his hand gently across one wall. I sometimes wonder. He paused. Whether anyone expected us to arrive. Selira answered quietly. Perhaps not us. She looked down the corridor. But someone. The station consisted of only 6 primary compartments. Crew quarters. A laboratory. A maintenance room. A compact archive. A control center. And the observatory itself. No evidence suggested permanent occupation by a large staff. Lyra estimated that no more than 12 Guardians had worked here simultaneously. Marcus laughed. So they studied an entire star system with fewer people than our engineering department. The control center occupied the heart of the station. Its consoles were naturally inactive. Crystal memory arrays lined one wall. Most had deteriorated beyond recovery. Others remained physically intact despite their immense age. Marcus connected portable power units. One by one, small indicators flickered to life. The station had been silent for 40,000 years. Now, for the first time since the Guardians departed, its systems awakened. No dramatic alarms sounded. No hidden defenses emerged. Instead, a single line of ancient Guardian script appeared on the nearest display. Lyra translated almost immediately. Observation Post 27. Behavioral Survey Station. Kale looked puzzled. Behavioral. Another screen illuminated. Long-term monitoring program. Subject: extragalactic predatory organisms. The room fell silent. No one needed to ask what that meant. Devourers. Marcus carefully stabilized the ancient database. It isn't complete. How much survived? I asked. Perhaps 20%. Lyra smiled. Better than I expected. Kale nodded. Much better. The recovered records were unlike anything we had previously encountered. There were no engineering manuals, no technological blueprints, no weapon designs, only observations. Thousands upon thousands of observations. Data, trajectories, sensor recordings, behavioral analyses, statistical models. Generation after generation of Guardians had patiently watched the surrounding space, sometimes recording nothing for months, sometimes documenting a single Devourer incursion that lasted only minutes. Not soldiers, scientists. One repeated conclusion appeared throughout the archive. Lyra translated it several times before believing her own interpretation. The organisms consistently alter course before entering the system. Another report. No physical barrier detected. Another. Subjects retain full navigational capability. Another. Avoidance behavior remains voluntary. Lyra leaned closer. They aren't being blocked. Kale nodded. They're choosing another path. The archive contained dozens of competing hypotheses. None presented as fact. One proposed that the stellar radiation interfered with long-range perception. Another suggested temporary sensory discomfort. A third speculated that the radiation resembled naturally occurring conditions the organisms instinctively avoided. Every hypothesis ended the same way. Evidence insufficient. Marcus smiled. I think I'm beginning to understand why I like the Guardians. Daniel looked at him. They admitted when they didn't know. Marcus nodded. Exactly. Finally, Lyra compared the station's measurements with our own databases. The similarity became unmistakable. Not identical, but related. The unusual background radiation emitted by the star shared subtle harmonic characteristics with the cognitive camouflage technology we had inherited from the Guardians. Kale looked thoughtfully toward the ancient observatory window. So this may have been where the idea began. Lyra considered the possibility carefully. I don't think they copied the phenomenon. She paused. I think they spent centuries trying to understand it. And eventually, they learned enough to imitate a very small part of it. No one spoke for several moments. The realization was profound. The Guardians had not created miracles. They had studied nature with extraordinary patience. And somewhere within that patience, they had found the first clues to surviving an enemy that no one fully understood. The station had not given us a new weapon. It had given us something far more valuable. A new question. And if our year aboard the Horizon had taught me anything, it was that the right question could change history far more profoundly than the quickest answer. Part 6: Between Two Worlds. There is a common misconception about exploration. People imagine that every journey ends with a discovery. Sometimes it ends with understanding. Those are not always the same thing. The following days settled into a rhythm none of us could have predicted. Every morning, representatives from both worlds arrived aboard the Horizon. Never together. At least not at first. Each delegation insisted on separate meetings. Each carried its own version of history. Each believed that justice belonged exclusively to its people. Our role remained exactly what we had promised. We did not judge. We did not negotiate. We simply listened. And when both governments agreed, we carried messages from one delegation to the other without alteration. Not diplomacy. Communication. There is a difference. Gradually, the conversations became less hostile. Not because anyone had changed their political position. They hadn't. But something unexpected had happened. For the first time in decades, their leaders were speaking in a place where neither possessed military superiority. No orbital defenses. No missile platforms. No fleets waiting just beyond the horizon. Only words. And words have a curious way of changing once weapons are no longer listening. The breakthrough arrived quietly. No speeches. No dramatic announcements. At the conclusion of one meeting, the representative from the outer world remained seated instead of leaving immediately. He looked toward the communication display that linked us to the inner planet. I have one question. The representative on the opposite screen hesitated, then nodded. What is it? The silence that followed felt strangely familiar. Not uncomfortable. Thoughtful. Finally, the delegate spoke. When did we stop recognizing one another? No accusation. No anger. Only genuine curiosity. The representative from the inner world looked down for several seconds before answering. I don't know. It happened slowly. Neither of them realized it. But everyone on the bridge did. For the first time, they were discussing the future instead of defending the past. Meanwhile, our scientific teams completed the final analysis of the Guardian station. Although much of the archive had been lost forever, one document remained almost perfectly preserved. It was not a technical report, nor a scientific paper. It was the mission's final evaluation. Salira translated slowly. Even after 40,000 years, the words felt remarkably contemporary. Observation Post 27. Final Expedition Assessment. Native Civilization Status, Stable. Technological Development, Early Bronze Age. External Threat Assessment, Negligible. Natural stellar conditions continue to discourage predatory organism activity. Artificial protective measures, unnecessary. Recommendation, preserve natural cultural development. Periodic observation only. No one spoke for several moments. Finally, Kale broke the silence. When they came here, these people were still casting bronze tools. Daniel looked toward the observation window. They never knew anyone was watching. Salira nodded. And the Guardians chose to keep it that way. I found myself reading the final recommendation again. Preserve natural cultural development. Simple words. Yet they explained everything. They could have introduced themselves, I said quietly. They could have, Kale agreed. They had the technology. They had the knowledge. They even had the opportunity. He paused before continuing. But they also had restraint. Lyra looked toward the distant star displayed on the sensor table. They understood something we're only beginning to appreciate. What? She smiled faintly. Not every civilization needs saving. Sometimes it only needs time. The station had answered one question. The Guardians had protected the civilization from the sanctuary of silent skies because, without their station, it would have been exposed to the Devourers. Here nature had already done that work. The unusual stellar radiation made the system unattractive to the Devourers. Not impossible to enter. Simply a place they consistently chose to avoid. The Guardians had recognized that protection. studied it for centuries, recorded every observation, and then they had moved on. Not because the system lacked importance, but because it no longer required them. On our final day in orbit, both governments made an unexpected request. They wished to continue communicating after our departure. Not through military channels, not through intelligence networks. They wanted something neutral. Marcus looked almost offended. After everything we've been through, they're asking for a communications relay. Daniel smiled. I think that's exactly what they're asking. Marcus folded his arms dramatically. I was hoping for something more heroic. Lyra looked at him. You prefer building weapons. Marcus laughed. No. He looked through the viewport toward the space between the two planets. I suppose I've always preferred fixing things. Within a few hours, our engineering teams assembled a compact autonomous communications platform. It carried no weapons, no surveillance systems, no defensive capabilities. Only power systems, quantum synchronization arrays, and communication equipment. A bridge built from signals instead of steel. When it was deployed into a stable orbit between the two inhabited worlds, both governments immediately registered it as neutral territory. Neither objected, perhaps because neither owned it, or perhaps because both needed it. As preparations for departure began, I returned once more to the bridge. The two planets filled the forward display. Beautiful, peaceful. From this distance, there were no battlefields, no borders, no enemies. Only two worlds sharing the same star, the same sunlight, the same future, whether they realized it or not. Horizon ready for departure, Lieutenant Arlen announced. Course plotted toward the next Guardian marker. I nodded. Engage. The stars stretched into rivers of light. The system disappeared behind us. Another chapter closed. Another question answered, and several more created. As our engines carried us toward the next forgotten waypoint, I found myself thinking less about the Guardian station than about the people we had left behind. The Guardians had understood something extraordinary. Knowledge alone cannot change a civilization. Technology cannot force wisdom. Even Pisa cannot be delivered from orbit. It has to be chosen. Perhaps that was why they had watched instead of ruled. Why they had studied instead of conquered. Why they had trusted that one day someone else would continue their work. Not by giving the galaxy every answer, but by helping it ask better questions. Somewhere behind us, between two worlds that had spent decades speaking through weapons, a small communications relay quietly circled its lonely orbit. Waiting, listening, ready for the next conversation. And somehow, I believed that was a far more fitting monument than any fortress could ever be. Because the future is rarely built by those who win the last battle. More often, it belongs to those willing to begin the next conversation.